Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. Sophia Davis and James had planned a bright future together some years ago. Their shared ambitions and professional devotion made them a strong and respected partnership. Sophia's unrelenting ambition in finance resulted in quick promotions, while James' brilliance in software design earned him excellent praise. Despite the emotional distance caused by their demanding occupations, they worked hard to form a family based on common values, constantly striving to remain connected despite their distinct objectives. Sophia's professional success provided her with confidence and pleasure over time, but it also caused her to isolate herself from James. Her concentration with work gradually drew her attention away from her spouse and children. Outwardly, the family seemed solid, with James keeping the household running smoothly and providing consistent support. However, behind the surface, unresolved tensions and hidden conflicts continued to build, producing the silent tension of an impending conflict. One early morning, small shafts of light filtered through the slats, gently lighting the room. Sophia turned to see her spouse beside her. Even at 30, James was incredibly fit, contradicting the stereotype of a technologist. She grinned while watching him. His arm lay thrown over his face, concealing him from the early light, like a careless sleeper who can snooze wherever. She saw the clock. It was 15 minutes before her alarm. She smiled to herself, savoring the few calm minutes before the day started. She started with a delicate, gentle touch that moved methodically over James' skin. His body reacted instantly, with his hips swaying in sync with her hand. Sophia's grin widened. She appreciated how easy she could arouse him. She understood that her touch was all it needed to arouse his interest. James murmured quietly, describing Sophia as an enchantress. She agreed jokingly, moving closer to him as they came together. He seized charge, and their connection became more intense. Sophia turned her back to her husband, telling him she would miss him as the hot shower water warmed her chest and stomach. He explained that she could always cancel as he scrubbed her back with the giant loofah. Sophia sighed, admitting she'd rather remain with him and the kids, but explaining she was close to making a bargain. She nearly tasted it. If successful, she would get another $200,000 bonus, her second of the year, and she imagined how much fun they might have with it. James groaned, knowing from experience that it was pointless to argue or challenge their need for more money. He remembered a period when he was the highest earner, but Sophia had long overtaken him. Her desire extended beyond money and negotiation. It was all about discovering flaws, scheming, and winning. She was a hunter, constantly looking forward to the next adventure. Her mind was already on the next transaction before the last one was even completed. He told her that he was certain she would succeed, commenting that she has the Midas touch and that whatever she touched turned to gold. Sophia chuckled, stating that she loved the word and thought it was a useful asset for a banker. James responded by kissing the back of her neck and gave her the soapy loofah, telling her it was his time. He moved to face the shower spray directly, placing his palms on the chilly tiles and turning his head into the warm flow. At the sound of Sophia's heels, James poured a black coffee with 1 sugar and pushed it to an open area on the counter, winking at his laughing 6-year-old kids. Sophia saw their giggling and inquired what was so amusing, kissing their heads before sitting next to Chloe and Lily. Chloe laughed and said that she was the cause. Lily also said that their father told Sophia couldn't do anything before her coffee. Sophia stopped, playfully inspecting her cup as if it was something new, which just made the girls laugh more. Smiling, she agreed their father could be correct, joking that she'd best drink up, else who would braid their hair? The girls shrieked, arguing that their father was bad at braiding, while Lily reminded them that he once misplaced their ribbons. James, in feigned distress, lamented over the tragedy of the lost ribbons, which made everyone laugh. He switched to a serious tone and pushed them to get going, since Sophia's return to work was approaching. Unless she had an early meeting, James normally got the girls dressed while Sophia did the final touches, such as hair and ribbons. He brought the kids to school while Sophia's workplace was in the other way. Today, with school out, he intended to bring Sophia to the airport for her business trip to Melbourne, where she would join other bankers to negotiate a multi-million-dollar transaction. The girls planned to spend the day at the zoo with Mrs. Thompson, who had been with the family since they were born. Despite his early reluctance to hire assistants owing to his working-class origins, James eventually saw the advantages. Mrs. Thompson's assistance enabled Sophia to continue her education, adding an economics degree and an MBA to her financial qualifications. Looking back, James recognized his worries were unwarranted. Sophia was a devoted mother, and Mrs. Thompson was important in running the home, caring for the daughters, and providing family meals. Chloe and Lily adored her, describing her as a beloved grandma figure. While Sophia completed arranging the girls' hair, James immediately scrubbed the breakfast dishes, believing it was inappropriate to leave them for Mrs. Thompson. Hearing the rear door open, he grinned. Mrs. Thompson's timing was always impeccable. After the normal hugs and admonition for his children to behave and listen, James took Sophia's overnight bag and walked to the garage, remarking how heavy it felt. He did not make any comments. Sophia would have prepared for every scenario. In the dimly lighted garage, James loaded the luggage into the trunk and unlocked the passenger door for Sophia. She sat down, laying her briefcase and bags by her feet while the garage door slowly opened. Sophia started conversing. "I'm wondering whether that coffee shop on Queen Street with the bicycles on the wall is still there." "I do not know. It's been around 5 years." "A lot may change," James said, feeling a quiver at the thought of Melbourne. Sophia continued, oblivious to his change in attitude, hoping the coffee shop was still open and joking that she would even try one of their delicious muffins. Sophia had been stringent about carbohydrates since the kids were born, so Mrs. Thompson had changed the family meals to accommodate her low-carb tastes. James attempted a little grin. "Should I try to sneak one back for you? I remember you liked the raspberry cream cheese and white chocolate one." "Yes, I did," James said dryly as he navigated familiar neighborhoods. "But I think you cured me of that particular craving." Sophia's cheery glow faded for a minute before she brightened, hinting she'd get him a fresh reward. "It'll be a surprise," she added. "I'm sure it will," James said as they approached the junction. He slowed down and signaled left toward the city. A gravelly voice from the rear seat surprised them. "Change of plans, old buddy. Turn left." Both responded instinctively. Sophia shouted, turned to look behind, as James grasped the wheel and pressed the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a sudden halt. "Who are you?" Sophia yelled, her eyes riveted on the rifle leveled at them. "What do you want?" James demanded, tightening his grip on the wheel. Their attacker laughed, enjoying their horror. "Who I am is your worst nightmare. What I desire is a little more complex. But the real issue is, why should you do what I say?" "Why?" James asked with tight teeth. "2 reasons," the guy said, elevating the Magnum slightly. "First, I've got a Magnum. And secondly, I have your girls." Chaos broke out as Sophia shrieked and James struggled to unbuckle himself while grabbing for the invader. Their kidnapper merely leaned back, smiled, and asked dryly whether they were done. When Sophia and James eventually lapsed into awkward silence, James wanted to know how they could be certain he had their girls. Sophia, with a rebellious tone, said that the girls were in the zoo with Mrs. Thompson. The guy, scratching his chin and beard, confronted Sophia, asking whether she was sure about it. The rasping sound of his fingers brought her attention to his face, and she realized with a sickening sensation that, apart from his sunglasses, he wasn't hiding his identity. Her stomach wrenched, and she questioned if they would make it through the day. As 2 vehicles drove up behind them and honked, the guy told them to get moving and turn left. When James inquired about where they were heading, the guy hissed that he would tell them when he wanted them to know, thrusting the tool into James' side to underscore his point. James complied with the directions. The guy then demanded their phones, telling them to give them up calmly and without any trickery. He placed both phones in his vest, which was bulging with unknown goods, and then snapped his fingers at Sophia, demanding the second phone. Sophia tried to act naive and perplexed, but it didn't work. The guy urged that she stop playing games and give him the second phone in a briefcase. Sophia put her bag on her lap, took out the phone, and gave it to him over her shoulder, avoiding James' look, though she could feel his eyes darting between her and the road, his glare searing through her. James' angry voice questioned the existence of a second phone, but Sophia responded that it was not the time to address it. Their captor grinned, agreeing with her and informing James that now was not the time to probe his wife's hidden phone. James looked at the guy in his rearview mirror. The speaker went on to say that now was the time to obey commands if they wanted to keep their girls safe. Sophia, in a confrontational tone, said that the girls had gone out for the day and did not trust the man's allegation. She accused him of lying, saying that they left when she and James did. The guy sneered in answer, raising his phone to eye level and looking between the screen and Sophia's face. After tapping a few keys, he gave her the phone. A quick glance at the screen verified Sophia's worst suspicions. The dude had their unlisted home phone number. She gasped, straining to breathe as terror built inside her. Mrs. Thompson's voice got through, but it was unsteady and uncertain, in sharp contrast to her normal serenity. Sophia felt a crushing weight in her chest, like if a vice was tightening around her. It sounded like she was about to cry. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. It's Sophia. Oh God, I am so sorry. They have grabbed us. They have the girls. I am sorry I couldn't stop them." Sophia slammed the phone onto her lap as if it had burnt her, erupting in horror with a harsh, piercing screech. Both guys flinched. They do, James. They have the girls, Sophia cried, her shoulders trembling. James punched the steering wheel. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this? We are not very affluent or renowned." "Why? You're rich enough, techie." "Now, Mrs. Davis, hand back the phone." The guy hissed. "What do you mean, and what do you want?" "Just tell us," Sophia implored, handing him the phone. "We will do everything. Please don't injure our daughters." "That's what I want to hear now, Stevie boy. Take us to the National Bank on Maple Avenue." Sophia and James exchanged glances. It was their bank. "So, kids, what is the total? How much money do you both have tucked away?" The guy inquired, his voice tinged with feigned curiosity. James began to respond, but Sophia spoke first. "About $275,000, give or take." James closed his eyes quickly and held his breath. "Tut tut tut, Mrs. Davis, have you forgotten what you just promised? You'll do everything to rescue your daughters. Because you have just lied to me." In the rearview mirror, James saw the hijacker shake his head in disappointment. "Let me see, what was the sum again?" "Oh yes, $303,000. Does this seem about right?" The guy taunted. Sophia and James exchanged another gaze. The sum was accurate, to the penny. Sophia agreed and nodded. "No more lies, Livy girl, or I might start thinking you don't care about your rugrats," the guy said. "Please," Sophia implored, wiping her tears with her jacket sleeve. "Please don't hurt the girls. Do what I say and cut the nonsense, and your girls will be fine," the gentleman said. Sophia nodded as more tears streamed down her face. He scowled at her. "Pull yourself together. You need to retreat, and we don't want anybody to suspect anything with you looking so sad." Sophia shook her head, reaching into her purse for Kleenex and cosmetics. James remained mute, only sometimes looking in the rearview mirror at their kidnapper. He hastily glanced aside whenever he saw the man stare on him. From the corner of his eye, he saw Sophia dabbing foundation beneath her eyes with a little sponge. The remainder of the journey was uncomfortable and mainly quiet, with their labored breathing blending in with the buzz of neighboring traffic. Only one individual in the automobile seemed untouched. As they approached Maple Avenue, James slowed and looked for a parking spot. Nervous, he fumbled with reverse parking, eliciting a chuckle from their captor. James' face clouded for a second. They stood silently, their gaze fixed on the bank 30 yards across the street. When James and Sophia heard their captor's door open, they stepped outside and waited for his orders. He notified Sophia that it was time to withdraw, warning her against any indications or strange conduct that may alert the personnel. He told her that one mistake would result in her never seeing her kids again. Sophia took the suitcase, her tears welling up as she nodded and replied in a broken voice. After a little pause, she confirmed her knowledge while clearing her throat. James recalled that withdrawals exceeding $45,000 needed 2 signatures, so he stopped Sophia to address it. Their kidnapper extensively examined James and issued the same warning, indicating that if he tried any heroic measures, their girls would be in danger. James nodded unwillingly, agreeing. Their kidnapper laughed and said $303,000 was a little amount to pay for their girls. James nodded grimly in agreement and took Sophia's briefcase. James checked for traffic and crossed the street with her, waiting halfway to approach the bank. He gave their captor a last nod before going inside. They proceeded to the counter. James saw Sophia laboring with the withdrawal sheet, her handwriting barely legible. He quietly took the slip, crumpled it, and tossed it before filling out a new one and handed her the pen. Her fingers shook significantly and her face was tense. He urged her to take a few calm breaths, telling her that they couldn't afford to make errors and needed to concentrate on Chloe and Lily, who relied on them. Sophia nodded, biting her lip as she signed, tears welling up in her eyes as she whispered how he was stealing all they had fought so hard for. James only shrugged, unsure of how to answer. Sophia then inquired as to why they had been targeted, questioning whether his business was engaged in any sensitive or government-related activities. James considered he worked on security and surveillance software, but nothing justified it. Shaking his head, he said, "What about you? Have you angered someone, concluded a poor transaction, overlooked someone, or caused any layoffs?" Sophia was troubled, a few tears trickling down her cheeks, which she quietly pushed away. She confessed she didn't know for certain, but she did remark that takeovers and mergers sometimes resulted in staff layoffs, and several in her department disliked her recent advancement. Since merchant banking was still very much a man's industry, they went so far as to take their daughters. She sank her face into her hands, her shoulders trembling as she attempted to control her emotions, reiterating that she didn't know. James paid special attention to her, thinking she would not go unnoticed by the bank cashier. He instructed her to return to the vehicle, promising her that he would handle it himself. He pointed out that one glance at her would set off alarms and they couldn't risk it. Sophia did not dispute with him, which surprised him. She gave him an appreciative expression, bent her head, and went to the door without turning back. James took a steadying breath and entered one of the lineups. James handed over the suitcase, informing their captor that they had done what he requested and requesting that he release them and their girls. The captor glanced about before focusing his attention on James, commenting that he didn't see anybody who could dictate conditions to him. His visage tightened as he explained that they would only be completed when he chose, ensuring that James understood. James squeezed his lips together and nodded. Turning to Sophia, the guy gave her a sarcastic smile, wondering what had happened to the fierce negotiator and moneymaker he had anticipated, implying she wasn't as strong under duress as her reputation suggested. Sophia's shoulders fell, a sight James had never seen, even during their worst moments in Melbourne. The guy scoffed and taunted her, wondering how it felt to lose all she had fought for. Sophia raised her head, distraught, as James put a comforting arm over her. James gently responded that they had not lost everything. They still had each other and their girls, so money was not the most important thing. Their kidnapper insulted him, calling him a philosopher, and reminded them that if they wanted their girls to be safe, they needed to keep obeying commands. When James started to protest that they had done as requested, the guy interjected with a parody of a well-known TV character, adding, "But wait, there's more." James, suspecting another demand was coming, inquired what more they could do, considering that the man had already taken their money. The captor said he needed them to make a delivery. James and Sophia exchanged glances, perplexed as to why he would go to such trouble for a delivery. The money made reasonable, but this felt weird. The stranger instructed James to go to Jameset Street. James started the vehicle and drove into heavy traffic, believing they could have walked quicker. James and Sophia were unaware of Central Park's splendor as they went by, but the captor was aware. He proposed to Sophia that she spend more time in the park during lunch breaks, possibly by the pool of reflection, meditating on her life decisions. Sophia half-turned in her seat and snapped back, "What do you mean by that?" The guy answered smugly, encouraging her to keep cool and indicating that it hadn't taken long to figure out why they were moving from Melbourne to Perth. He hinted that she had been engaged in anything improper. James winced when Sophia gasped, flashing a peek at him while concentrating on the road ahead. Sophia defended herself, stating that was a long time ago, James had forgiven her and they had worked things out. She argued that he had no right to bring up their history. The guy said, "On the contrary, my group gives me all the rights I need," noting that he was not one of her office minions and that her colleagues and subordinates did not like her. He hypothesized that it may be due to her ambition, backstabbing, or demanding personality. Sophia disregarded the remarks, having no need to defend herself. Merchant banking was a nasty, competitive environment in which she had to be twice as vicious as her male counterparts to be taken seriously. After their time in Melbourne, she had preserved her competitive edge just for the job. She looked at James, recognizing the agony the man's statements had caused. The strain around his eyes, the tight set of his jaw, and his grasp on the wheel all indicated the effort he was making to suppress his feelings. She forgot about their girls for a time while watching him suffer silently. James' grief was her own. She despised that her previous deeds had become a weapon for their captor to wield against him. Realizing how much Melbourne still impacted him, she pushed him not to listen, telling him that the captor was attempting to split them and that Melbourne was long gone. They were happy, loved one another, and had daughters. The guy started clapping mockingly, then laughed. "Bravo," he hissed. Sophia was furious, demanding to know why he was doing this, how he knew so much about them and had gone to such efforts to study their lives. She reminded him that they were neither renowned nor tremendously affluent. The guy explained that his motives were his own and urged her to monitor her attitude, warning that one phone call may alter everything. James softly instructed Sophia to halt and obey the man's demands. When Sophia inquired where they were going on Jameset Street, the guy directed them to 50 Jameset Street and inquired as to who lived on the 5th floor. James acknowledged he didn't, ready himself for the importance of the talk. He observed Sophia had become pale, her fists clutched firmly in her lap and her knuckles white. In the rearview mirror, James saw their abductor beaming triumphantly back at them. The guy went to Sophia and asked whether she knew who was on the 5th floor. Sophia turned to stare out the window, unwilling to react, and the guy only laughed. James drove left and started looking for parking, knowing it would be difficult in the inner city. Luck appeared to favor him, or was it the man's plan, as he discovered a location just 100 yards from their objective. They got out of the automobile. Sophia was stiff and suspicious, while James appeared tightly strung, every muscle ready to spring. Their kidnapper gave James a thick, document-sized packet whose contents were unknown but certainly significant. Sophia moved back, her eyes fixated on the envelope. James looked at her, but she averted his gaze. The guy unexpectedly gave James a phone while amusingly observing them. He reminded them that he could have more instructions, advising them against any efforts at heroics and reminding them of their daughters. He then reiterated the instructions, 5th floor, number 50. Both agreed and started going toward the office building, but the guy stopped them, instructing Sophia to remain behind while James delivered the box alone. Sophia avoided meeting James' eyes once again. Once James was out of earshot, the guy turned to Sophia. "Can you guess what's inside the envelope?" he asked. Sophia nodded, appearing unhappy. He baited her further, implying that she had grown too ambitious or had begun to believe her own falsehoods. She answered dejectedly, conceding that he most likely already knew, since everything in the transaction hinged on it. The guy shook his head, obviously enjoying her misery. "Insider trading," he said, stressing the seriousness. "ASIC does not look kindly on people who cheat and break the law," he said, implying that James would face harsh penalties if he presented the package to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. Sophia's head slumped, her soul broken. If the package contained what she feared, her career would end and her life as she knew it would be irrevocably altered. James would be devastated, disappointed, and may not support her. She hated explaining herself to her girls, seeing a dismal future full of courtrooms and perhaps jail time. The guy gave her a lifeline, stating he would give her one phone call to persuade James not to deliver the mail. She glanced up, not sure whether he was genuine, but optimism rose as he offered a phone to her. She grasped it quickly, fearing he might rescind the offer. Sophia took a quick glance and realized the phone she'd been given was her burner phone, which the guy had picked on purpose, judging by his knowing face. She felt a momentary sense of remorse but repressed it. The guy assured her there was just one rule: she could not mention that he had given her this chance. Sophia took a deep breath to calm her quivering palms before dialing James' phone. He responded uncertainly. "James," she implored him not to deliver the letter. James said that he had to since the guy would hurt their girls otherwise. Sophia begged with him to believe her and not deliver it. James questioned why she would jeopardize the girl's safety, telling her that he couldn't just ignore the man's instructions. She persisted again, pleading with him to believe her and assuring that the guy would never find out if he threw it in the garbage. As she said, she looked at the guy, who grinned. James, sounding hesitant, inquired as to what was in the package that warranted such a risk. Sophia, unable to explain, implored him again to believe her, emphasizing how important it was for both of them. She begged with him to throw away the envelope. He indicated for her to stop the call. She made one more plea, "Please believe me. Don't deliver it." She hung up, feeling weak as she returned the phone, her pulse beating. She prayed James would listen, knowing that she would never endanger their girls. The guy teased her, asking whether she was acquainted with honesty and urging that she consider who the true culprit was, him or herself. The insult came near, and she looked aside, her cheeks flaming. Sophia saw him grab another phone from his vest, this time her own, which had a little scratch. He pushed a few keys and unlocked it with her pin as if he knew everything. Sophia heard James' voice clearly in the distance. The guy said coldly, "Sorry, it's not the miss, it's your worst nightmare. When you reach the 5th level, have someone snap a photograph of you giving over the envelope. Just make it happen." James answered in a cautious tone. Sophia secretly prayed with James to believe her, knowing he would understand. She would never endanger the girls. She prayed more than ever before, even amid their problems in Melbourne. Every passing minute made her nerves tense. What was taking so long? Finally, James approached them, with the envelope no longer visible. Did he toss it away or deliver it? He walked slowly, his eyes directed downward, avoiding eye contact with both her and the captor. Without speaking, the guy stretched his hand for the phone, which James gave him. The guy opened it and went to the photographs folder, leaving Sophia stiff and breathless as she said one more desperate plea. The guy extended his phone to Sophia. On the screen, James stood next to a happy brunette who took a hefty ochre-colored packet. Sophia sank in sorrow, as if her world had crumbled. Her knees struck the pavement, but she scarcely experienced the impact. With her face in her hands, she wailed, wondering why James had sent the mail. Why hadn't he trusted her? James approached her, but the guy stopped him, mocking Sophia about feeling betrayed and stating it wasn't nice to have her husband choose him over her. Ignoring the guy, James bent down to help Sophia get to her feet, hugging her close and comforting her. The man scoffed, implying that James' nice guy attitude was the reason Sophia didn't appreciate him, a lack of butcher instinct. Angered, James released Sophia and rushed at the guy. They scuffled momentarily, throwing blows, while the surrounding passers-by disregarded them and moved away. The guy muttered a reminder about the females, causing James to lose vigor. The guy ordered them back to the vehicle, claiming that they had drew enough attention. Sophia turned and begged with him, claiming they had done all he asked, that he had stolen their money and damaged her career. She begged him to let them and their girls go. The guy declined, saying they had one more delivery to make. Sophia sagged down, her thoughts racing over what more he might do to them. When James inquired where to go, the guy responded, "Chatswood," which caused James to moan. Sophia, now concerned, approached to James and questioned whether he had done anything criminal, fearing that their girls would be left without parents. James seemed offended by the presumption and told her that, although he hadn't done anything illegal, he had probably done something dumb. When Sophia pushed for further information, James said, "It's nothing more than a few careless internal emails about a new client, joking with my colleague Mike about how clueless the client seemed despite his wealth." Sophia relaxed, relieved that the situation was not as terrible as she had anticipated. James stated that it may be enough to get him fired. The guy grinned cynically, complimenting James' deductive abilities and said that it would be a pity if his boss chose to let him leave. James pulled the vehicle into traffic, cutting off a sedan and receiving a loud hoot, which he returned with a hostile gesture. Their captor only chuckled. James sped between lanes, trying to beat the light before it turned red. Their captor smiled, remarking on their haste, and James said that he just wanted it to be finished. As James and Sophia slipped into contemplation as their abductor kept a careful eye on them, the automobile grew silent, and anxiety filled it. Sophia looked out the window, perplexed by the man's motivations. Why was he methodically destroying them? Was this retaliation for James' comments against a client? The rationale seemed to be very severe. In any event, the why was less important anymore. By the end of the day, their money would be gone, James' career in jeopardy, and her own future unknown. Worst of all, her thoughts shifted to her kids. She hoped they were safe with Mrs. Thompson because the idea of harm coming to them was heartbreaking. James, barely keeping it together, only wanted to be home with his daughters. He was prepared to face whatever repercussions arose. James parked near the client's office on the familiar North Shore once his ordeal of crossing the harbor bridge was over. Turning to the guy, he said, "Who makes the delivery?" The captor grinned. "You may as well handle it. Just remember to follow the standard procedure, a picture, no trickery." The guy handed James a phone and a slimmer packet than before, saying, "Have fun." He smiled at his own cynicism. Sophia stared at him as she watched James go purposefully toward the structure. Sophia confronted the captor, wanting to know why he was so cruel, punishing James and stealing their girls if the problem was with her. The guy merely said that all will be disclosed and smiled, adding that Sophia should have some fun at work. When Sophia shouted back, asking if he really termed this fun, he told her to calm down and reminded her that he still had her girls. Sophia became quiet, her natural desire to take leadership repressed. She felt unbalanced and powerless, which she detested. Failure was not in her lexicon. Sophia scanned the street, waiting for James. When he finally turned the corner, he seemed dejected, and her heart sunk. She knew he had to feel the same powerlessness and anxiety she had, as a loving parent and a proud guy accustomed to being in charge. It must have been anguish for him to be unable to safeguard his kids. Without saying anything, James stepped into the vehicle, gave the phone to their captor, and secured his seatbelt, hands on the wheel, waiting for the next order. The guy giggled at the picture, noting that James should have smiled. James held back his response. Sophia leaned over and squeezed his arm for comfort. He reciprocated with an appreciative grin. The guy teased them, asking whether they were eager about their next location. James responded tersely, stating the guy will inform them in his own time, conceding that he was in authority. The captor chuckled, implying that James would become an excellent officer for obeying commands, even when he disagreed. James gave him a harsh look in the mirror. The guy casually noted James' military history, saying he'd worked securely behind the scenes while others took the risks. James responded aggressively, justifying his intelligence job as life-saving and telling the guy not to disrespect him or his dead companions. "He'll tear you apart if you harm my daughters," James said. Unconcerned by James' reaction, the guy just told him to remain cool and continue following commands to protect his family's safety. Sophia felt James' dissatisfaction with the remark. The man's statement suggested that they would have to overcome further barriers before he could free them and their girls. She clung to the hope that they would all make it through the day. After a little interval, their kidnapper recommended they go to the Hawkesbury River, citing a bed and breakfast with water views. Sophia tensed, realizing the whole day had been about her. She strained to keep her calm, wondering how he knew her secret. She'd been so careful, no routines, no scheduled meetings, no lunches outside the workplace. Ryan, her co-worker and boyfriend, was the only one who knew. He was meant to pick her up after James dropped her off. They'd landed 2 major transactions worth billions for the bank. Sophia was filled with fury. Her career was wrecked, her family was threatened, and her husband's job was jeopardized, all for a worthless affair. Ryan was little more than a fleeting pleasure following their first big deal, an occasional affair. Neither of them saw the danger in celebrating again following their most recent transaction. But now that decision had jeopardized her whole life and family. Recognizing that the day's events were linked to her indiscretion did not reveal who was behind it all. It couldn't be James, had suffered too, and she knew he couldn't bring himself to harm her. If anything, he'd respond as he did after her affair in Melbourne, heartbroken, reclusive, and wondering what he needed. Mrs. Thompson's panicked call eliminated the likelihood of James' participation. Could this be Ryan? Perhaps he intended to discredit and remove her as a competitor. He was undeniably ambitious and brutal, but would he risk implicating himself? Then there was Ryan's wife, Victoria. Coming from old money, she had the means and contacts to pull off anything like this. Sophia had no idea whether Ryan was going through the same ordeal. Sophia's irritation increased. Her normally astute strategic thinking was unable to determine who was responsible. Their kidnapper mocked her, wondering whether she had figured it out. James looked to her, perplexed, and asked if she knew why this was occurring. Sophia battled with herself. Her brain prompted her to distort the facts and spin the issue to avoid a harsh confession. But her heart said it was enough. Her decisions had harmed James and placed her family at peril. It was time for honesty. Yes, Sophia said, I do. It's all my fault. James, astonished, inquired as to what she meant. Sophia, overcome with regret, felt a stab of guilt. She was aware that as a result of her actions, they had lost money, James' career was jeopardized, and their girls were at risk. She had brought this on them by breaching the law. She fought to explain, but their kidnapper interrupted, telling her to get to the point. James sat tensely with his hands on the wheel, waiting. James, with this recent agreement. I broke the law, Sophia said, her voice scarcely audible. He corrected her. No, you broke it. Sophia sighed, realizing that she had gained insider knowledge for the customer. This information was critical to the transaction. James glanced at her incredulously. You violated the law and endangered our family for a deal. Sophia attempted to rationalize it by emphasizing the big bonus they would have gotten. But, seeing the disdain in James' eyes, she trailed off, distraught. Their captor scolded her, stating that honesty and integrity include doing the right thing even when no one is looking. Sophia shuddered, recognizing that the irony of a hijacker lecturing her on morals had escaped her at the time. The guy pushed harder, his eyes steely, expecting her to give all she had attempted to conceal. Sophia whispered quietly, with her head down and her eyes closed. Ryan and I headed a small, close-knit team on these acquisitions. We worked too closely, she conceded, with reluctance. We slept together as a kind of internal celebration. At that time, the automobile door opened. Sophia glanced up, expecting James to depart, but he stayed sat and stared at her with a hateful expression. She recoiled as if realizing their kidnapper had fled, leaving behind just his vest. Sophia glanced around, confused, and saw that the bag containing their money had vanished. Panicked, she asked James what had occurred, why the guy had departed, and how they would get Chloe, Lily, and Mrs. Thompson released. James said that the guy had not accepted the money. When Sophia, still perplexed, demanded answers, James reversed the situation, asking how it felt to be kept in the dark, confused, and powerless, just as she had kept him. She asked him to explain, but he responded with a cold, pointed inquiry about whether she enjoyed feeling excluded and terrified. Finally, James admitted that he knew everything about Natalie Bennett, the insider trading, and the affair after their prior agreement. He noted her so-called Midas touch, jokingly observing that Jessica seemed to have it as well. Olivia gazed, astonished, her deep blush revealing her guilt. She believed she had been cautious, but he knew everything and had hidden it from her. Olivia felt terrible, opened the vehicle door, and vomited, attempting to gather herself as she comprehended James' role in the day's events. She confronted him, accusing him of arranging the pain and endangering their children. James gently informed her that the kids were well at home with Mrs. Thompson, who had thought she was assisting him in a prank that Olivia would enjoy later. Olivia, dumbfounded, muttered, "Oh my God," unable to identify the guy beside her. She accused him of stealing all of their money, but James pushed the vest aside, displaying their phones and urging her to open the banking app, explaining that he had only withdrawn $100. Olivia, stunned, realized it was all a setup. She questioned who the guy was, and James simply said, "No one you know." Olivia concluded there was no use in inquiring more about the man's identity based on James' tone. "And the documents you handed to ASIC," she inquired, "you wanted me to go to jail. You must truly despise me." James shrugged, stating that the envelope had been filled with blank paper. ASIC had only received a stack of empty. Olivia weakened as relief flooded over her. "So the delivery to your customer was also fake?" James nodded. "Why go to all this trouble?" she said, perplexed. "Why?" "I don't know, Olivia," James said. "I don't even know who you are anymore." James smiled slightly. "Maybe you don't. Congratulations, you wanted me to have a butcher instinct, and now I got it." "Please don't say that," Olivia murmured. "I love you just the way you are." Ignoring her remarks, James questioned if she really wanted to know why he had done this. She nodded, knowing the response will sting. "I wanted you to feel a fraction of how I've felt over the previous 6 months, or, more accurately, since Melbourne. If I had just had an affair or divorced you, you would not have grasped the depth of my emotions. I wanted you to feel the betrayal, loss, grief, and worthlessness that a deceived spouse experiences. You felt it for one day. I've been dealing with it for many months, if not years. Oh, James, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you, she started, but he interrupted her. You have been involved in two of the darkest events of my life. Do you understand what it means? I have put friends into perilous circumstances and lost them. But what you did hurts much more since it involves the one person who was meant to love and respect me beyond all else. But I never disrespected you, she said, grasping for his arm, which he shrugged off. To me, respect does not mean concealing an affair or preventing your sweetheart from disrespecting me by cheating. You violated my sentiments, our vows, and the principles I trusted you to understand, especially after Melbourne. James stopped, glancing out the window, struggling with what to say. He resolved to speak it all and move on, knowing that harboring resentment would only hurt him. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Being deceived seemed like a living death, he said. The first victim was our history. What was true and what was not? You'll never really know. Do you remember what the second item to die was, Olivia? James said forcefully, breaking through her bewilderment. Our future. Our future was the second victim, ruined by your continual betrayals and falsehoods. We don't have a future together now, Olivia. You liquidated it. Olivia begged for another opportunity, telling him that he had forgiven her before and promised it would never happen again. She even offered to relocate if that was what he wanted. James shakes his head. Do you believe it's third time lucky? You promised to remain loyal on our wedding day, but you broke it 7 years ago. You pledged to be true again, and you violated it. He went on to explain how repeated betrayals gradually destroy love and respect, leaving only suspicion and bitterness. I tried so hard to forgive you after Melbourne, hoping to see just the lady I fell in love with, but instead I saw your darker, dishonest side. Funny thing is, I was nearly able to forgive you. Until I saw indications again. At first, I convinced myself it couldn't be true. But my misgivings persisted, and when I checked, my worst worries were verified. You were betraying me again. James stated that he only saw the dishonest side of her and that the lady he had married seemed to have disappeared. Olivia said she was still the same person, apologizing and explaining how she'd been engrossed in the joy of victory. She'd felt indestructible, claiming Ryan was merely a part of the game with no genuine emotional stakes for her. It was just sport, like a victory lap. James gazed at her with sympathy. That is where we disagree. For you, it is just a physical act. However, for me, it is extremely personal. Physical expressions of love are more than simply sports, they are personal. Olivia recognized his point of view but emphasized that not everyone views intimacy and love as inextricably linked, implying that some of his pain may be attributed to pride and ego. Watching someone else play with his toys infuriated him. Stephen refused her offer, claiming he was upset since his love was more than just envy. Just because you're a woman doesn't give you a monopoly on feeling. From what I observe, you are the one who lacks genuine emotion. Olivia recoiled, horrified by Stephen's rage. Had never talked to her with such vitriol, even after Melbourne. For the first time, she felt apprehension about him. The automobile seemed claustrophobic, but Stephen hadn't finished. So, Olivia, you won't have to worry about hurting my ego anymore. You may now be with whomever you choose, including Tom, Dick, and Harry. I do not care. I want a partner who shares my values, and you plainly are not that person. It's time to go our own ways. Olivia protested, stating she loved him and felt he still loved her, but Stephen just shrugged. Once I did. I used to like smoking, but I stopped when I discovered it was harmful to my health. Staying with you would put my mental and emotional health, as well as my future happiness, at danger. Trusting you again would be foolish, and I'm tired of being dumb. She begged, pledging to make amends and never jeopardize his love again. Stephen groaned, recognizing that she still didn't comprehend. He used an example and asked her to recollect the finest thing they did with the kids last summer. Olivia assumed it was their vacation to Whitewater World, which the kids had been talking about for months following. Exactly, Stephen said. That's how your affairs seem to you. Excitement. The mundane things I do pale in comparison to the exhilaration of Mr. Three-Piece Suit, the powerful banker. I am neither thrilling nor forbidden, just the man at home. You'll always have those recollections, those little respites from married life. I will not compete with the fantasy. Olivia objected, stating that she would not compare him to her previous flings, but Stephen shook his head regretfully. You are in denial, Olivia. Have you never considered them while I am out of town, or even when you are away? Olivia was unable to respond, but she knew he was correct. She recalled and even dreamed about those recollections. Stephen continued, aware that her silence proved it. It's terrible enough that you think about them while I'm not present. Imagine sleeping next to you night after night, wondering whether you're dreaming about someone else. You've never experienced such soul-crushing uncertainty. When Olivia attempted to speak, Stephen gently clutched the wheel and banged his head against it. She watched, concerned, fearing he'd finally reached his breaking point. Enough, Stephen said forcefully. Have you learned nothing from today? Every aspect of it was designed to make you feel anguish, fear of loss, impotence, betrayal, abandonment, and fury. I know you felt them. I observed you. Why do you believe I arranged it? I don't know, Olivia said quietly. To punish me? She asked. No. Not punishment. I wanted you to experience how I felt over the previous 10 months. I never expected to feel that way about you again after Melbourne, but I have. Do you remember what you did to me today? Maybe the next time a guy loves you, you'll think carefully before betraying him. Please, Stephen, do not give up on us. I need you. I adore you. I want to grow old together. My experience with Ryan was not love. It was just meaningless, like playing squash. Olivia, you continue to miss the point. It may not have meant anything to you, but it meant something to me. Our connection was not only about you. You ruined my love for you, our life together, and what you call recreational intimacy. That makes me want to tear out your heart, just as you did to mine. Do you like to hear some statistics on lovemaking? Without waiting for a response, Stephen continued, the typical person has sex for around 6 months of their lives. That is it. Women spend twice as much time simply choosing what to dress. That's why you tossed me away, something you spend less time on than selecting your shoes. Stephen shook his head and ran a hand through his hair. Enough. This is meaningless. You don't comprehend, and maybe you never will. Stephen's comments resounded in Olivia's consciousness. You do not comprehend. Perhaps you never will. She remembered her own dread, betrayal, and lust today, and realized they were nothing compared to how she had made him feel. She choked back tears when she realized how profoundly she had hurt the guy she loved. Deep down, she felt that if she was ever apprehended, he would forgive her like he had before. What arrogance! She knew she had actually offended him, so he went to tremendous lengths to make her understand. Olivia, panicked, attempted to communicate her sorrow and love, but Stephen stopped her. Enough, he repeated. He checked his rearview mirror, started the engine, signaled, and drove into traffic. Do you enjoy making deals, Olivia? Stephen inquired, but he didn't wait for a response, both knowing it was rhetorical. Here's the deal, you purchase an apartment, and I will buy one. Mrs. Reynolds' residence is where the girls stay. It would be unfair to deprive children of their sole home just because you couldn't resist indulging yourself with recreational closeness. Olivia gasped at how ludicrous her own words sounded coming from him. Stephen continued, apparently uninformed or unconcerned by her response. That means you and I will do the back and forth. 1 week on and 1 week off. There is no child support or alimony for either of us. We'll open a joint account to pay home and child-related expenditures, regardless of personal sentiments. We keep it polite. I promise not to mention anything nasty about you, and you will do the same for me. If we're at the same event, we'll be courteous. Olivia was startled by Stephen's cool, matter-of-fact tone. She hadn't seen this side of him before. And make no mistake, Olivia, there will be no negotiating. Take it or leave it. If you give me sorrow or fight me on this, I will abandon all hopes of protecting the girls from the reality. I will personally present the genuine papers to ASIC. That is precisely what I would do. I'd adore sitting in the courtroom while the prosecution tore you and your boyfriend apart. I would giggle at your sentence. Longer is preferable. You're simply fortunate that you gave me two great girls. I'll show them restraint. For them, I will refrain from burying you. Olivia gazed out the window, seeing nothing, understanding that she had woken up much too late. She realized defeat. She'd seen it enough times from the opposite side of the negotiation table. Her marriage was finished. She'd lost. Olivia sat in the front of the chapel, her gaze attracted to the stunning stained glass windows. Without turning, she recognized Stephen and his wife, Rachel, sat at the other end of the row. Olivia disliked Rachel. 10 years younger, with an entirely new appearance. In contrast to Olivia's deeper, seductive features, she is fair-haired, small, blue-eyed, and innocent. Olivia disliked her for reasons other than her beauty or age. Rachel's daughters loved her. Stephen adored her and looked at Rachel in the same way he had looked at Olivia. Stephen now regarded Olivia as if she were invisible, as he had for more than 2 decades. Olivia detested the fact that, after 24 years, she still missed Stephen. She hoped she could despise him for it, but he remained the benchmark by which she judged all other men. She despised Rachel for embodying everything she wasn't, for the way her girls praised her and hugged her often. They should have felt this way about their biological mother. Instead, they treated her more formally. Didn't she show them that a woman could have both a profession and a family? Didn't she set an example as a successful businesswoman? Wasn't she usually well-groomed and slim, with wonderful taste and culture? Why, therefore, did they adore and confide in Rachel? Yes, Rachel owned a network of fashion businesses, and her kids proudly informed her that she had worked her way up from the bottom. Did this make her the girls' go-to person? Olivia knew her thoughts were unjust, but she couldn't stop herself. Rachel had seen herself as both a wife and a mother. Olivia glanced to her right and saw Mrs. Reynolds' profile, feeling a little relieved that age was finally catching up with her. Mrs. Reynolds loved Rachel, which puzzled Olivia. She didn't understand why the girls had insisted on Mrs. Reynolds' attendance. They hadn't needed a nanny in years, but Stephen demanded she remain in her cottage when the daughters graduated high school. Olivia listened to the organ music in the background, hoping it might lift her spirits. Her bad mood began the previous day, when she discovered that head office had promoted a young lady she had mentored. Someone she felt had outmaneuvered her for a promotion she thought she deserved. It was the 3rd time in 5 years she'd been ignored, and it hurt. The priest clearing his throat brought her back to the present. She wasn't sure why Megan wanted her eldest kid christened, considering that they had never attended church. Olivia felt James, her son-in-law, was the source of the influence. Olivia listened with half an ear as the priest said the typical ceremonial words. Her focus diverted as she saw Megan turn to face the relatives and friends present. Their gazes connected briefly before Megan's focus shifted to her father and Rachel. Olivia then overheard the priest urge Megan's parents to come forward. She put her handbag on the floor. Rachel got up, but she grimaced as she approached Megan and James, her hand gripped in Stephen's. Olivia looked down as she felt a soft touch on her arm. Mrs. Reynolds said softly, "Not you, dear. Megan and James have requested Stephen and Rachel to become Cody's godparents." Olivia sunk back into her seat, embarrassed, as Megan started to explain why she had selected her father and Rachel as godparents. Megan lauded her father, saying he was as near to a perfect parent as possible, knowing when to be strong or tender, when to reprimand or forgive, and always making her and Samantha his first priority. She then addressed Rachel, stating she wished to be like her and that she and Samantha often questioned themselves, what would Rachel do? Megan praised Rachel for loving her and Samantha as if they were her own, and she said that if something happened to her or James, they couldn't think of finer people to raise Cody. Olivia's eyes welled up with tears of grief, anguish, and rage. She felt betrayed that Megan would deliver such a statement when her mother was there. Olivia, humiliated and upset, wanted to rush away, but remaining felt like the only way to prevent additional exposure. As she stewed in her fury, a little voice within became louder and demanded her attention. With every passing instant, you reap what you sow. Olivia's mind was filled with previous pictures, each one a reminder of lost chances, birthdays, events, breakfasts, and bedtimes, moments when she might have been there for her girls but chose to work instead. It had been easier at first to delegate more of their care to Mrs. Reynolds, avoiding her girls' sad, wondering looks and embarrassing queries about why she and their father alternated living with them. Guilt made it easier to remain away, and immersing herself in her work became a method to escape her guilt and responsibilities. The more she worked, the better she felt. After all, it was simpler to kiss a sleeping kid than to confront a distressed, awake one. Eventually, the distance became ordinary. Everyone accepted it, and before she knew it, her kids had left for college. They didn't need her at that point. The knowledge affected her profoundly. For the most of her adult life, she had made the wrong choices, valuing avoidance over acceptance, money achievement over love, and work before family. Even that career was waning. Olivia slumped on the hard pew, feeling completely alone. Megan's words made it plain that Olivia was not her own mother in the manner that counted. She was only an egg donor. She could no longer hide the truth, she had failed in her most essential function. Stephen, Rachel, her kids, and their families formed a close circle of love and support. Olivia had no one. She would never be a member of their inner circle and would never understand the affection they shared. Defeat and loss, she understood, were worse than dying. Death provided an escape. Defeat forced her to accept her decisions. Thank you for watching. What do you believe Olivia's future holds? Please let us know in the comments.